Rebecca Fenton enjoyed being single in sunny South Florida.
She had an apartment on the beach.
She was loving that life. She was independent.
However, she happily gave up her single life for Larry.
They adored each other. She was madly in love with him.
We fell in love very quickly.
And everything seemed perfect.
We had a good life, a very good life.
He completely took care of her.
But after 4 apparently blissful years, tragedy struck the wealthy businessman.
I think my husband's been shot.
I found my husband in a pool of blood.
I'm feeling for both. I'm not getting anything.
Was it a burglary gone wrong?
The house has been ransacked.
Larry maybe walked up on them, surprised them. I think somebody panicked.
Was Rebecca also a target?
She did have a problem with a stalker.
Or could she be the killer?
I couldn't imagine harming Larry. I didn't do this crime.
Clearwater, Florida, February 3rd, 2008. It was Sunday afternoon in this retirement community of 100,000 just across the bay from Tampa.
Clearwater attracts a lot of tourism because of its beautiful beaches along the coast. But then you also have the mainland where there's lots of residential neighborhoods.
Although most Clearwater residents weren't on the beach that Sunday, they were gathered in front of TVs waiting for the big game to start.
February 3rd, 2008 was Super Bowl Sunday.
But for the Clearwater police, the action would start well before kickoff. At a little before 5 p.m., they received an urgent call to 911.
911, what is your emergency? My emergency is I think my husband's been shot.
The caller was 40-year-old Rebecca Fenton.
I walked into my home, and I found my husband in a pool of blood.
I was like, and I ended up going to the house. I felt to see if he was alive.
I tried to take his pulse, and I ran outside, and I called 911.
Okay, ma'am, where are you right now in the house?
I am outside of my car.
I was scared that maybe somebody was still in the house and that it was a burglary gone bad.
The house has been ransacked.
Fearing the shooter was still in the house, officers raced to the scene.
Please, hurry. You gotta hurry.
And we have officers coming, okay?
Not just for Rebecca's sake, but for her husband's, too.
I've already checked her pulse. I didn't feel one.
Would help arrive in time.
We have our ambulance on the way.
Or after less than 4 years of marriage, would Rebecca be a widow?
I can't live without this.
Okay, I understand, ma'am. What is your husband's name?
It's Larry. It's Larry A. Benton. And he loves me and I love him.
Born in 1967, Rebecca Thudine's story started in Arizona.
I was born in Tucson, Arizona, in Mothan Air Force Base Hospital.
Her mother was young and single.
I was living at my parents' house at the time.
Rebecca didn't live there, though. Her young mother gave the infant up for adoption soon after her birth.
She was adopted out at 18 months old and was raised in a little town northern Arizona called Winslow.
Raised by her adopted family, Rebecca grew up to be a pretty popular teen.
She was very bubbly and just a ray of sunshine and a ray of light.
But she tired of small-town life, and dreaming of the big city, she left town soon after graduating high school.
She flew the coop and went on to Boston, Mass. For a while.
I went to college at BU. I have a bachelor's in psychology.
But after a few years in Boston, the Arizona girl found herself longing for sunshine.
A friend of mine lived in Clearwater Beach on the West Coast at the time. She invited me to come down with her and her husband. I had a job in Boston at the time, but I fell so in love with the state of Florida.
And within a few months, she was calling it home.
She had an apartment on the beach. She lived with some girlfriends of hers.
She put her psychology degree to use.
I moved down here and got myself a job for a facility called Bayada Nursing Services, and I distributed psych meds for the mentally ill.
And she dated regularly, but refused to be tied down by any one man.
She was single. She was loving that life. She was independent.
Although she did have one big commitment, the gym.
Rebecca was very much into fitness and taking care of herself physically.
But even as she settled into her single life in Florida, big changes were coming. First, in 1998, Rebecca's birth mother contacted her after years of searching to find her.
I wanted to find out where she was, how she was doing, and I also wanted her to know what was going on with her life.
Although they'd spent 30 years apart, the reunion in Arizona was a happy occasion.
She come into our lives bouncing out of the Phoenix airport one night, and there was never an issue about where have you been. There was never any anger.
For the next several years, there were regular phone calls and visits back and forth between Florida and Arizona.
She just melded so well with our family.
Rebecca's just one of these larger-than-life personalities, always smiling, always laughing, lights up a room when she walks in.
And then, one night in 2003, the 36-year-old called her family back in Arizona with big news.
She had met this wonderful man, and she was madly in love with him.
He was a divorced medical equipment salesman named Larry Fenton. 17 years older than Rebecca, Larry had also come to Florida from elsewhere.
He was from New Jersey. His family all lives up north.
Although he hadn't moved south in search of the sun, for Larry, aging retirees were the draw.
Larry Fenton was a salesman for a company called Getting a USA. It's a worldwide company that sold medical equipment to hospitals and healthcare facilities.
He was with the company for a very, very long time.
And by 2003, he'd become one of the company's top sales executives in America.
He was the director of sales for the entire eastern half of the United States.
Larry was a very successful businessman.
Larry's personal life was less of a success, though. By 2003, he'd been married and divorced 3 times.
He spent a lot of time on the road.
And just like Rebecca, the 53-year-old also spent a lot of time in the gym.
We both worked out avidly.
In fact, that's how they met.
We were approaching the same machine at the same time, and it struck up a nice conversation between us, and he invited me out for a cup of coffee and a slice of pie.
They struck up a relationship, a friendship, and things continued on, and they began a relationship.
They really connected. He was very well put together. He had confidence, but not boastful.
And by the time she told her family back in Arizona about Larry, things were getting serious.
She told me that she thought this was the one.
We fell in love very quickly, and we were married within a year.
In fact, they got married twice, once in Florida.
First wedding was at Clearwater Beach Hotel, big beautiful dining area with a view of the beach.
And then, so that Rebecca's birth and adoptive families back in Arizona could more easily attend, there was a second ceremony in Nevada.
That was a big, lavish wedding that everybody was invited to, family, friends. Everybody was there for that one.
Back in Florida, Larry bought the couple a beautiful home a block from the ocean.
It was built in 1926 and was a historical site. It was the house that everybody on the block wanted.
And if Rebecca's neighbors coveted her house, they envied her life.
He completely took care of her.
I no longer had to work when my husband came into my life.
She could stay home and take care of their beautiful house and garden.
And of course, work out.
The house had an in-law apartment back on the acreage in the back of the yard, and we turned that into a gym because both of us worked out so avidly.
They really enjoyed going on runs together and exercising together and really growing as a couple.
By 2008, after almost 4 years of marriage, it appeared that Rebecca and Larry had grown closer than ever.
They adored each other.
We had a good life, a very good life.
But on Super Bowl Sunday, Rebecca and Larry's lives would take a sudden, tragic turn.
I came in from the gym.
Okay.
And I called his name. I went to the locator. So I'm running there in a pool of water.
Coming up, is the shooting really the result of a burglary?
Computers, cash, checkbooks, things like that were undisturbed.
Or is someone after Rebecca?
The man in the black car had followed her.
It was shortly before kickoff on Super Bowl Sunday, February 3rd, 2008, when 40-year-old Rebecca Fenton made an urgent call to 911.
My husband's been shot. My house has been burglarized.
Officers arrived at the scene within minutes.
Rebecca Fenton was outside sitting on the curb of the residence.
I sort of went into a haze. I was escorted by a couple of officers across the street. I was waiting to get news that he was going to be okay.
And while Rebecca waited, the officers went inside.
I found Mr. Fenton lying in a pool of blood just inside the door.
He had been shot several times in the back, neck, and arm.
EMTs arrived soon after, but there was nothing they could do for the 57-year-old medical equipment salesman.
The shot to the neck is the one that killed him.
Once the EMTs pronounced her husband dead, the responding officers stepped back outside with the awful news.
My husband was a great man, and it's still very difficult to talk to him.
Rebecca told the police that she'd been on the property when the shooting occurred, but not in the house.
She stated that she was in a detached garage behind the house that they had changed into a workout room, and that she was working out.
And according to Rebecca, when she left Larry, he was in pregame mode.
Her account was that Larry was in the living room downstairs watching golf, was maybe going to take a nap so that he could stay up late and watch the Super Bowl.
So, leaving Larry in his easy chair, Rebecca said she'd gone out to the garage to work up a quick sweat.
She stated that sometime during her workout she had heard a pop.
She said the noise sounded like something fell off the roof.
She said it didn't alarm her enough to actually go and see what the noise was.
I think that's because I had the music turned up so loudly.
So according to Rebecca, it wasn't until she'd finished her workout several minutes later that she'd gone back to the main house.
She walked in the back door from the porch and saw Larry lying on the floor.
Rebecca said that the sight of her husband sprawled in a pool of blood had sent her into a panic.
I was trying to scream at him what happened. I did the best that I could to take a pulse, but I don't know if I got one.
She says that she checked him for a pulse on his neck as well as on his wrist.
And then, according to Rebecca, she'd grabbed her phone and rushed outside, afraid that Larry's killer was still in the house.
She went out to her car to make the 911 call.
My husband's been shot. My house has been burglarized.
The burglar hadn't gotten away with much, according to what Rebecca told the police.
She mentioned 4 items, which were laptop, computer, jar of coins, a jewelry box, and an iPad.
Although even as she was talking to the officer, another item suddenly occurred to her.
I noticed that my husband's Cherokee Jeep was missing.
The Fentons owned 2 vehicles. She drove a Hyundai sedan and Larry drove a Jeep Cherokee.
But only her car was currently in the driveway.
The inference is that the people that came into her house and did this must have taken the Jeep and fled from the scene.
Could the missing Jeep lead police to the killer?
The same evening as the homicide, we put out the BOLO, which is a be on the lookout for Larry's stolen Cherokee.
And then the homicide investigators drove Rebecca to the station for a formal statement. And crime scene tape started going up around the house.
They roped off my house. They then roped off our entire estate.
Officers also canvassed the neighborhood.
No one had seen anyone suspicious in the area. No one had noticed any vehicles quickly leaving the area.
Although the canvass did provide some information.
We had several neighbors that heard a series of 4 to 5 gunshots.
It was 4:30 when those shots happened.
Meanwhile, at the Fenton residence, the investigators searched for clues about the intruder. But what they discovered was puzzling.
There didn't appear to be any signs of forced entry to either the back or front door.
Someone had ransacked the house, however.
There was a certain amount of disarray. Drawers were pulled out and standing open, books pushed off a bookshelf.
Although, while there was no sign of the iPad, jewelry box, or other items Rebecca had mentioned, it appeared the burglar had missed several things.
Computers, cash, checkbooks, things like that were undisturbed. Things that you would reasonably conclude a burglar would take.
Assuming they had time, that is.
Larry maybe walked up on them, surprised them. I think somebody panicked.
But if the intruders left the house in a hurry, they hadn't gone far. At least, not in Larry's Jeep.
The Jeep was located by officers just a block away.
Basically backed up one house behind the Fenton's house.
There was no evidence of forced entry or damage to the Jeep, suggesting that the Jeep had been moved with a key.
But the real puzzle was what the investigators found inside the Jeep.
The 4 items that she mentioned that might possibly stolen were all in the back of the Jeep.
Why would someone go to all the trouble of loading up the Jeep with stolen items, only to abandon them a short distance from the murder scene? The investigators could think of only one answer.
This was a staged burglary.
And that conclusion led to the next question. Who would want Larry's murder to look like a burglary gone wrong? Hoping for some answers, the investigators turned to Rebecca, who'd been transferred to police headquarters to give a formal statement.
When I first met Rebecca, she was very quiet and she appeared upset. Her hands were shaking. She was in a state of shock, I would describe her.
However, she was able to answer a few questions.
We asked Rebecca if she had any enemies, if Larry had any enemies, if she had had any recent problems.
I did not think that my husband nor I had any enemies. I didn't know of anybody that could possibly be capable of doing this.
Although Rebecca did raise one possibility.
Rebecca told us that she did have a problem with a stalker.
According to Rebecca, the first incident had occurred in the fall outside the grocery store.
She was at the trunk of her car, and he had actually grabbed her groceries out of her cart and said to her, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. I just want to speak with you." And she said that she told him to get away from her.
Rebecca said that the man had left, driving away in a black car that she later spotted cruising around their house.
She said the man in the black car had followed her a couple of times.
And when she told Larry about the mysterious man in the black car, he'd become very concerned.
She and Larry had discussed it, and at one point he did go to a local gun store and purchased a firearm for home protection.
It was a 5-shot 38 caliber revolver kept in a nylon bag in the back of a sock drawer.
But when the investigators passed Rebecca's information about the gun along to the investigators at the scene, they made what appeared to be a critical discovery.
It was found to be missing.
Coming up, a routine search changes the entire investigation.
Everything really pointed to Rebecca.
And the investigators uncover a scandalous secret.
I always considered it kind of a pretty woman's story.
By the morning of February 4th, 2008, it had been less than 24 hours since 40-year-old Rebecca Fenton called 911 and reported finding her husband dead in the couple's Clearwater, Florida home.
Rebecca says that she came in the house and she found her husband, Larry, laying in a pool of blood.
And while Rebecca said she hadn't witnessed the crime,
I was back in the gym, which is on the other side of the yard. I had music turned on.
She had named a possible suspect, a mysterious man in a black car who'd been stalking her for the last several months.
There was a lot of investigative work left to do as far as who is this stalker,
The investigators also suspected that Larry had been murdered with the couple's gun, which was missing from the house.
They must have found Larry's gun. He must have confronted them. They shot and killed him.
The gun is a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. They kept it in a dresser drawer up in the master bedroom on the second floor of the house.
It was an ironic outcome, to say the least.
According to Rebecca, it was purchased as a result of her having a stalker.
Or was there more to it than that? At daybreak, once they finished processing the house where the murder occurred, crime scene investigators moved outside.
We waited for the outside processing to take place during the day.
They searched Larry's Jeep, which the killer had apparently moved from the Fentons' driveway in an effort to make the murder look like a robbery.
They found it a few hours after police initially responded to the house, a couple blocks away from the home.
And they searched Rebecca's car, which was still parked outside the Fentons' home.
Her car that was parked in the scene, and that's part of the crime scene until it was processed and cleared through the detectives.
However, what started out as a routine bit of processing took an unexpected turn when the investigators made a discovery that would change the entire direction of the investigation.
Inside a white plastic shopping bag, under the front passenger seat, was a firearm.
It was the couple's missing .38.
That was very surprising.
Because according to her 911 call, Rebecca had been the last person in the car.
Where are you right now in the house?
I am outside of my car.
The gun wasn't all the investigators found under Rebecca's front seat either.
They found the keys to Larry's car.
So how had the gun and Larry's car keys ended up inside Rebecca's car?
Everything really pointed to Rebecca.
The police looked at me as a suspect.
And when they asked her to come back down to the station for a few more questions, she refused.
She had obtained legal counsel and no further statement was obtained from her.
Because according to Rebecca, there was nothing further to say.
My house was burglarized. My husband was murdered. I had nothing to do with it, and I do not know who did.
With Rebecca no longer cooperating, the investigators started digging into her past, looking for a possible motive. And as it turned out, there was a lot to discover about Larry's wife of nearly 4 years.
Rebecca Fenton did have a criminal history.
Nothing as incriminating as murder or even robbery. But Rebecca's rap sheet did reveal that nursing wasn't the only way she'd supported herself in her 20s.
When she first came to Florida, she was a high-end escort.
She had been arrested for prostitution charges.
That was her profession, essentially, until she met Larry Fenton.
And that wasn't the only way she'd cashed in on her looks, either.
She had done some low-budget or low-level pornography.
But how did Larry fit into Rebecca's past?
I always considered it kind of a pretty woman's story.
According to her family, Larry had saved Rebecca from the life she had been living.
Larry brought her out of the depths of whatever she was into, brought her up, took care of her.
Larry really brought stability and security for her, and it made all of us feel very safe about where she was and what she was doing.
And he'd rescued her from more than just prostitution.
Rebecca had been having a lot of problems with her drinking and pill use.
But with Larry's encouragement, Rebecca had joined Alcoholics Anonymous and committed to staying sober.
She joined AA and she was very successful in it. She gained a lot of friends, and at one point she was so successful that she actually became a sponsor herself.
Thanks to Larry's support, it appeared that Rebecca had succeeded in turning her life around. But when the investigators looked into her current AA attendance, they soon started wondering, had it also sown the seeds of Larry's murder?
There were comments that Rebecca made to her Alcoholics Anonymous sponsor. that she had romantic feelings for another man that she met at the program.
He was a prep cook at a local restaurant.
Did she have an affair? Well, not trying to sound too much like a lawyer, but that all depends on what an affair means. We don't know if they ever even kissed each other.
At least not before Larry's death.
After Larry was killed, neighbors began seeing a man showing up around midnight and leaving at like 5 in the morning.
Was it possible that Rebecca's new boyfriend had something to do with the murder? The answer appeared to be no.
He had an alibi that day. 2 people independently indicated that he was at a Super Bowl party.
And according to both witnesses, he was at the party at 4:30 when the shooting occurred.
He could not have been in 2 places at one time.
Which left the investigators with only one suspect, Rebecca.
We were very close to having enough evidence to make the arrest. We really felt we had a lot of good circumstantial evidence.
They even had proof that the gun found in Rebecca's car was the murder weapon.
The Florida Department of Law Enforcement Firearms Section was able to confirm that this was the firearm that was used to kill Larry.
But they couldn't put it in her hand.
There was no evidence on the firearm itself, fingerprint or DNA.
So the authorities held off on making an arrest.
It was still possible that she could be acquitted. So it was better to wait and make sure we would be reasonably confident in a conviction.
The state attorneys, they only have one shot at this, and they want to make sure they tie up all loose ends.
This isn't about doing things fast, it's about doing things right.
Months passed, then years.
I lived in the house that my husband died in, and I held on to that house and tried to maintain the finances.
Which wasn't easy, considering the circumstances.
Because she was a person of interest, and there was a dispute between Larry's family and Rebecca over who was entitled to the money.
My life slowly went into a downward spiral.
She has no job, money's tied up.
She had fallen away from Alcoholics Anonymous, or started drinking again.
And in 2013, 5 years after the murder, she lost her home.
The house had gone into foreclosure.
In March of 2013, she's given a 6-month eviction notice.
Although ultimately it wasn't the foreclosure that forced Rebecca out.
In June of 2013, Clearwater Fire Rescue responds to a 911 report of a house on fire.
I pull up to the house, and then I was like, oh, this is the Fenton murder house.
The house was a total loss.
After the fire, she moved into a trailer park here in Clearwater.
And the fire landed Rebecca in the middle of a whole new investigation.
I was actually accused of setting my own house on fire.
The burn patterns indicated an ignitable liquid.
My opinion, she set that fire because she wasn't going to allow anyone to have it if she wasn't going to have it.
However, even as detectives were building the arson case, there were new developments in the murder investigation. It started when one of the detectives working the case noticed that prior to the fire, there had been another 911 call from Rebecca's house, roughly 4 years after her husband's death.
In the summer of 2012, Rebecca places a 911 call to the Clearwater Police Department, and she's calling to report a domestic disturbance.
It involved Rebecca and an ex-boyfriend, a man named Kerry.
I was with him for approximately 6 weeks before he got physical with me.
Rebecca had obtained an injunction for protection against domestic violence against Kerry.
Provided with his name thanks to the injunction, the investigators tracked down an address and ended up talking to Kerry's nephew and the nephew's girlfriend.
I told them that I was investigating an old case from Clearwater and that I thought that Kerry might know something about it. They spontaneously state, "Is this about that woman who killed her husband?"
Had Rebecca confessed to her ex-boyfriend? Hoping that might be the case, the investigator redoubled his efforts to track Kerry down.
I actually found him in the county jail on an unrelated incident.
And on Friday, March 21st, 2014, a few days after talking to Kerry and 6 years after Larry's murder, Rebecca came home to her trailer and found the investigators waiting for her.
I was stunned. I didn't know if it had to do with the fire, my house fire, or if it had to do with my husband's murder.
But it all became clear as the cuffs went on.
I had an indictment and warrant for her arrest for first-degree murder.
Coming up, Rebecca's ex-boyfriend takes the stand.
It was the first piece of truly non-circumstantial evidence.
But will the prosecution's star witness come up short?
My attorney, by the time she said no further questions, the jury was chuckling at him.
On November 3, 2015, Rebecca Fenton's murder trial got underway at the Pinellas County Courthouse in Clearwater, Florida. The 48-year-old was charged with killing her husband, 57-year-old Larry Fenton, in February of 2008.
No one else ever became a suspect.
They never stopped looking at me. I always knew for 7-8 years that the police had considered me a suspect in Larry's murder.
And Rebecca had spent those same years vigorously denying that she had anything to do with her husband's violent death.
The 911 call, you can just hear it in my voice. I couldn't imagine harming Larry. I didn't do this crime.
But when the prosecutors started laying out their case, they argued that her 911 call also contained some very vital clues pointing to Rebecca as the killer. For instance, if she wasn't the shooter, how did the murder weapon and the keys to Larry's stolen Jeep end up under the seat of her car?
Okay, ma'am, where are you right now in the house?
I am outside of my car.
And then, after passing out copies of the crime scene photos, the prosecutors played another selection from the 911 call.
And I did a pulse on him.
She says that she checked his pulse not once, but twice.
On Larry's neck and his wrist, according to what Rebecca had said to the police. But the prosecutors pointed out to the jury the crime scene photos told a different story.
The blood on his body in the areas where she says that she would have checked for a pulse was completely undisturbed.
The pool of blood surrounding her husband's body had not been touched. It wasn't disturbed. So that didn't add up at all.
However, according to the prosecution, there was one thing about Larry's death that made perfect sense: Rebecca's motive.
She shot her husband in cold blood over money.
A medical equipment salesman, Larry had essentially climbed to the top of his profession by the time he met Rebecca.
Larry was a very successful businessman, definitely upper middle class. He was financially wealthy and very stable.
And he took very good care of Rebecca.
After Rebecca and Larry got married, Rebecca was able to stay home. It wasn't necessary for her to work.
But if that was the case, why kill him? The prosecution had a simple answer.
At the time of their marriage, they had signed a prenuptial agreement.
Larry had plenty of reasons to want a prenup, considering Rebecca's past.
She did work as an escort.
And with 3 divorces already behind him, Larry made sure he was well protected by the agreement.
Larry got to keep all premarital assets, and those were defined to include his life insurance policies, his 401ks, his home.
Still, Rebecca would get something in the event of a divorce. But did that mean she didn't have a motive for murder? Or was it a reason for her to want him dead?
Rebecca Fenton's alimony would be capped at $1,000 a month.
But if Larry died during the marriage, she would get everything, a significantly bigger payout.
The difference between divorcing Larry and killing Larry was about $1 million.
And according to the prosecutors, Rebecca figured that if she wanted that million, the clock was ticking.
She thought maybe divorce was imminent.
Why would Rebecca think she and Larry were heading for a divorce? To answer that question, The prosecutors put Rebecca's birth mother on the stand.
I wanted to see that Larry got the justice he deserved.
On the stand, Rebecca's mother testified about Rebecca's alleged involvement with the man she'd met at her AA meetings.
She had conversations with Rebecca about having feelings for a man she met through the program.
However, that wasn't all that Rebecca had apparently told her mother.
And Rebecca had told Karen, "I think Larry knows."
And according to the prosecution's theory, that was why Rebecca killed him, to preempt a divorce that would leave her with almost nothing.
The only way out, because of the prenuptial agreement, is that Larry has to die.
When you consider all of this evidence, the only inference that makes sense is that that Rebecca Fenton did it. She had to kill him to maintain the lifestyle she had.
That was the prosecution's theory, but it had one big weakness.
This was an entirely circumstantial case.
There was no physical evidence. They found the weapon, and it had no fingerprints on it. It had no DNA on it.
Which meant that there was a lot riding on her ex-boyfriend Carrie's testimony when he took the stand for the prosecution.
The admission she made to Carrie was the first piece of truly non-circumstantial evidence.
And according to Carrie's testimony, it was quite an admission, starting with the circumstances of when it occurred.
They were fighting about money, and she grabbed a knife from the kitchen and held it to Carrie's throat.
But as bad as that sounded, the prosecutors said what came next was the really critical part. What Rebecca allegedly said as she pressed the knife into her boyfriend's neck.
"I'll kill you like I killed Larry."
It was damning testimony, the closest the investigators ever got to a confession. But was it the truth? On cross, the defense pointed out that Carrie had been in jail when he first told the investigators his story.
And he did this so that he wouldn't have to do his prison time. They let him go on time served because of his statement.
Even the prosecution admitted that it was an effective cross-examination.
His testimony, it's fraught with bias, reason to lie, reason to make it up.
And it left the prosecutors scrambling to save their case.
To my attorney, by the time she said no further questions, the jury was chuckling at him as a witness.
Hoping to shore up Carrie's story, the prosecutors called Carrie's nephew and the nephew's girlfriend to the stand.
The people that he told the story to before any motive to lie existed, we were able to get them to testify to his prior consistent statements. That kind of rehabilitated his testimony.
But would it be enough to sway the jury?
Carrie wouldn't otherwise be what you would call an overly credible witness.
In fact, when it was the defense's turn, they didn't seem too worried about Carrie's claims.
They continued to say that it was a home invasion, robbery, murder gone bad.
It was someone else, plain and simple.
And whoever it was, the defense hinted that they weren't just behind Larry's murder. They were behind the arson, too.
The defense brought it up in a way as to suggest that the person that shot Larry had come back to sort of finish the job, if you will. Maybe destroy the house for its evidence or finally kill Rebecca, too.
And in both instances, the arson and the murder, the defense's position was unequivocal.
That Rebecca was an innocent housewife that was wrongly accused.
But would the jury hear from the innocent housewife herself?
I didn't choose to testify. We really didn't believe that by getting in that witness stand that I was going to defend myself any better than my two attorneys already had.
Which meant that on Friday, November 13th, Rebecca's fate rested with the jury. Coming up, the jury makes a swift decision.
It took them 2 hours to come back with a verdict.
But what will it mean for Rebecca?
I felt like a quick verdict was not good for us.
On November 13, 2015, the jury in Rebecca Fenton's murder trial announced that it had reached a verdict. The 48-year-old was accused of killing her husband, 57-year-old Larry Fenton, on Super Bowl Sunday, 2008.
She was the only one that really had the motive and the opportunity to commit this crime.
The defense, on the other hand, argued that Larry's death was simply the result of a burglary.
I don't believe anybody intended to kill Larry. I believe that it's strangers and that Larry came up on him and that somebody panicked.
And now, it all came down to whose version of events the jury would believe.
I wasn't sure how it was going to go. You can't really judge 12 people that you don't know.
One thing was certain, though. It hadn't taken them long to make their decision.
It took them 2 hours to come back with a verdict.
And that left the prosecutor more than a little worried.
I felt like a quick verdict was not good for us, because if they believed this was a burglary and not a staged burglary, then nothing else needs to be reviewed.
But would those fears be justified when the verdict was read?
She was convicted of first-degree murder.
It was hard to come to any other conclusion than what the prosecution was presenting, which was that she was guilty.
And it was a conclusion that carried a high price.
Her sentence is life without the possibility of parole or release.
Rebecca was devastated by the outcome.
When they announced the verdict, I just went numb.
More than 7 long years after Larry's murder, the investigators felt that justice was finally served.
It was a great sense of accomplishment in writing something that had gone unanswered for so long.
Was it the right answer? Rebecca's mother thinks so.
According to what I saw in that courtroom with evidence, with witnesses, I think that the prosecution did a appropriate job, and I think the sentence was as it should be.
Perhaps, although Rebecca sees things differently. Now serving life in prison, Rebecca says she still finds it hard to believe that anyone would think she could murder the man she considered her true love.
I couldn't get my mind wrapped around it, being convicted of such a heinous crime that I'm not even spiritually capable of committing against a man that was my life. And I might add, my meal ticket.
Shadow Ridge Fiction, 1981. The forgotten clue that changed everything. The town of Shadow Ridge woke every morning beneath the same mountains, the same church bell, the same rows of weathered storefronts. For 43 years, one thing never changed. Nobody spoke about the night Evelyn Harper disappeared. Officially, it was an unsolved missing person case. Unofficially, it became something else. A whisper, a warning. Parents locked their doors a little earlier. Children learned not to walk near Black Creek after sunset. Visitors noticed how conversations stopped the moment they mentioned the old railway bridge. Every family claimed they knew nothing. Every family remembered something. October 17th, 1981. The rain started before dusk. By midnight, Shadow Ridge had become a maze of empty streets and flickering streetlights. Evelyn Harper, a 28-year-old school librarian, locked the front doors of the town library and stepped into the storm carrying a brown leather satchel pressed tightly against her side. She was supposed to drive home. She never arrived. Her car was discovered the following morning beside Black Creek Bridge. The engine was cold. The driver's door was closed. The headlights were off. Her handbag remained on the passenger seat. Her house keys rested in the ignition. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing appeared broken. Yet Evelyn herself had vanished without leaving a single obvious trace. The first deputies searched the creek until darkness fell again. Divers entered the freezing water. Helicopters swept the valley. Volunteers combed the surrounding forest for nearly 2 weeks. Nothing. No footprints. No discarded clothing. No witness who admitted seeing her after she left the library. The investigation slowly lost momentum. Months became years. Boxes filled with reports gathered dust inside the county records office. The file earned a new label. Cold case. Time moved on. Businesses closed. Families moved away. The library was renovated twice. Black Creek Bridge received fresh paint. The town tried to forget. Only one man refused. Detective Samuel Mercer had been a rookie investigator when Evelyn disappeared. He spent decades chasing robberies, kidnappings, fraud cases, and homicides across the state. But every few months he reopened the Harper file. He never stopped believing that one overlooked detail had been hiding in plain sight. His colleagues called it obsession. He called it unfinished work. 43 years later, Mercer stood inside the county archive preparing to retire. His office contained only 2 cardboard boxes. One held family photographs. The other contained Evelyn Harper's file. He intended to take one final look before handing in his badge. Outside, the courthouse echoed with farewell speeches and handshakes. Inside the archive, silence ruled. Mercer spread every evidence photograph across a long wooden table. The abandoned car, the bridge, rain-soaked tire tracks, the library parking lot. He had seen them thousands of times. Then his eyes stopped on a photograph he barely remembered, a wide-angle image taken from across the bridge. Most investigators had ignored it because Evelyn's vehicle occupied only a small corner of the frame. Mercer leaned closer. Beyond the guardrail stood an old roadside bulletin board, half hidden by rain, covered with community notices. One paper looked different. It had been freshly pinned the night the photograph was taken. Mercer searched the original evidence inventory. Nobody had collected it. Nobody had even mentioned it. The photograph had remained inside the file for more than 4 decades. He requested the original negative from storage. The archivist returned carrying a sealed envelope. Mercer placed the negative beneath a light viewer. The enlarged image revealed something impossible to read in the printed photograph. A handwritten message. Only 5 words. Meet me after closing. Alone. Mercer's heartbeat quickened. The note had been hanging less than 50 feet from Evelyn's abandoned car. If she had read it after leaving work, it might have changed everything. Who wrote it? Who was supposed to meet her? Why had nobody noticed? The detective checked every witness statement again. Library staff, neighbors, friends, teachers. No one mentioned a message on the community board. Either nobody saw it, or someone removed it before investigators arrived. Mercer looked toward the courthouse window. The rain outside sounded strangely similar to the storm described in the original reports. For the first time in years, the case no longer felt frozen. It felt unfinished. He closed the file gently. Retirement could wait one more day. One forgotten photograph had reopened the oldest mystery in Shadow Ridge. And somewhere inside 43 years of fading memories, one ordinary detail was waiting to become the clue that changed everything. Mercer never went home. Instead, he carried the Harper file to the nearly empty records room and began reading every witness statement in chronological order. He ignored the conclusions. He ignored the summaries. Those had been written by detectives trying to finish the case. Mercer wanted the raw voices, the people who had spoken before memory softened the edges. The first interviews revealed nothing unusual. Teachers remembered Evelyn locking the library. A grocery clerk remembered seeing her buy coffee that afternoon. A mechanic recalled a heavy rain beginning shortly before sunset. Then Mercer found a statement that had received only 2 lines in the original report. Walter Briggs, newspaper delivery driver, saw a person standing near the bulletin board around 8:45 p.m., couldn't identify them because of the rain. They appeared to pin something to the board before walking toward the bridge. Mercer frowned. The statement ended there. No follow-up interview. No sketch. No attempt to identify the figure. 43 years earlier, investigators had dismissed it because visibility had been poor. Now it became the most interesting sentence in the file. Mercer drove to the former newspaper office. The building had long since become an antique store. An elderly woman behind the counter recognized Walter's name immediately. He kept everything, she said. Everything. She smiled. If he took a photograph, wrote a note, clipped a newspaper, he saved it. Walter had died years earlier. His belongings had been boxed and stored in the building's attic. An hour later, Mercer climbed a narrow staircase into a room thick with dust. Shelves overflowed with labeled cartons, weather reports, community newsletters, old negatives, receipt books. He searched for nearly 2 hours before discovering a box marked simply, October 1981. Inside lay dozens of undeveloped film sleeves and handwritten route notes. One envelope caught his attention. Across the front, Walter had written, "Bridge after storm." Mercer carefully opened it. The negatives were in surprisingly good condition. He arranged them on a portable light panel. Frame after frame showed rain-soaked streets, the library, the church, the bridge. Then one image made him stop, the bulletin board, taken only minutes before police secured the area. The handwritten note was gone. In its place remained only an empty thumbtack. Someone had removed the paper before daylight. Mercer enlarged the image. A dark sedan appeared in the background, only half visible. Its headlights were off. The license plate could not be read, but one detail stood out, a distinctive crack across the left headlight. He searched the original police inventory again. No damaged sedan had ever been documented near the bridge, which meant the vehicle had left before officers arrived. Mercer smiled quietly. Now we're getting somewhere. Back at the courthouse, he requested registration records for vehicles matching the make and model visible in the photograph. The list contained dozens of names. Too many, until he added another filter. Vehicles reported with collision damage during October 1981. The computer returned only 3 results. One had been scrapped before the disappearance. One belonged to a family living hundreds of miles away. The third remained registered in Shadow Ridge until 1984. Owner, Thomas Rowan. Mercer searched the original witness index. Nothing. Thomas Rowan had never been interviewed, never mentioned, never connected to the investigation. Yet his damaged sedan closely resembled the one captured in Walter Briggs's forgotten photograph. Mercer leaned back in his chair. After 4 decades, the case had finally produced a new name. Outside, evening settled over Shadow Ridge once again. The courthouse lights dimmed. Most employees went home. Mercer stayed. He pinned Walter's photograph beside the original bridge image. 2 photographs, taken minutes apart. One showing the mysterious note, the other showing it gone. Between those 2 moments, someone had walked through the storm, removed the message, and disappeared into the night. Mercer knew he was no longer chasing rumors. He was chasing a timeline. And somewhere inside those missing minutes, the truth had been waiting for 43 years. Mercer stared at the name for a long time. Thomas Rowan. 43 years of reports, interviews, evidence logs, newspaper articles, volunteer search records, and courtroom correspondence. And not once had that name appeared. That was impossible. A man whose damaged sedan had been photographed less than 100 yards from Evelyn Harper's abandoned car should have been questioned before the first sunrise. Yet there was nothing. No interview transcript. No field notes. No witness card. Not even a handwritten reference in the margins. It was as if Thomas Rowan had never existed. Mercer pulled the county registration file from storage. The folder contained only routine paperwork. Vehicle registration, insurance renewal, property tax receipts. Nothing criminal. Nothing suspicious. Then he noticed something peculiar. Thomas Rowan's mailing address changed 3 times within 2 years, yet every address remained inside Shadow Ridge. He hadn't been moving away. He had been moving closer, closer to Black Creek, closer to the old railway bridge, closer to the public library where Evelyn worked. Mercer spread a county map across his desk and marked every address with red pencil. The pattern was undeniable. Each move shortened the distance between Rowan's home and Evelyn's daily routine. Coincidence? Perhaps. But after 4 decades, Mercer had stopped believing in coincidences. He drove to the earliest listed address the following morning. The farmhouse had long since been abandoned. Windows were boarded. The porch sagged beneath years of neglect. A faded mailbox still leaned beside the gravel road. No number, no name, only rust. Mercer walked the property slowly. Most of the buildings had collapsed, but an old machine shed remained standing. Inside lay broken farm equipment, cracked glass jars, and piles of forgotten lumber. Nothing connected directly to Evelyn until he noticed a workbench in the corner. Someone had carved dozens of initials into its surface over the years. Near the edge, barely visible beneath layers of dust, 2 letters caught his attention. YH. Mercer brushed the dirt away carefully. The carving looked old, very old. Below the initials appeared a date, 10/17/81, the night Evelyn disappeared. He photographed the markings from every angle before calling the forensic team. The initials alone proved nothing. Teenagers carved names into it all the time. But the date, the exact date, that demanded an explanation. Hours later, crime scene analysts examined the bench using alternate light sources. Beneath the visible carving, faint impressions appeared. Someone had tried to sand away another message years earlier. Digital enhancement gradually revealed several missing words. Not all of them, only enough to read fragments. Don't. Bridge. Late. Mercer felt a chill. The message was incomplete, but echoed the anonymous note from the bulletin board. Meet me after closing. Alone. Now another hidden message mentioned the bridge. 2 separate clues. Same night, same location. He returned to the courthouse before sunset and reopened the box containing Evelyn's personal belongings. Most items had been cataloged decades earlier. A leather purse, reading glasses, a library key, a small pocket calendar. Mercer had examined them countless times. This time he looked differently, not for evidence, for routine. He turned each calendar page slowly. Appointments, book deliveries, school visits, reading programs. Nothing unusual until October. 3 consecutive Fridays carried the same tiny pencil mark in the corner. A small triangle. No explanation. No initials. Just a triangle. October 3rd. October 10th. October 17th. The final Friday was the night she vanished. Mercer compared the symbol with every page in the notebook. Only those 3 dates carried the mark. Someone knocked softly on the archive door. Archivist Helen Morris stepped inside, carrying a cardboard envelope. I found something you asked for. Mercer looked up. What is it? The library maintenance records. He frowned. I don't remember requesting those. You did. She smiled gently. Yesterday evening. Mercer had forgotten. The envelope contained work orders from the autumn of 1981. Most involved leaking pipes and damaged shelving. One request stood out. October 16th. Community bulletin board replaced after repeated vandalism. Mercer's pulse quickened. The bulletin board. He read further. The replacement had been installed only 1 day before Evelyn disappeared, which meant the anonymous note had been pinned to a brand new surface. He flipped to the back of the maintenance report. Attached was a receipt signed by the carpenter who installed it. Name, Thomas Rowan. Mercer slowly lowered the paper. For the first time, Thomas Rowan was no longer just the owner of a damaged sedan. He had personally installed the bulletin board less than 24 hours before the mysterious message appeared on it. The room fell silent. Outside the courthouse window, evening shadows stretched across Main Street exactly as they had 43 years earlier. Mercer walked to the evidence board and placed a new receipt beneath Walter Briggs' forgotten photograph. The connections grew clearer. Thomas Rowan repaired the bulletin board. A handwritten message appeared. Evelyn disappeared that same night. The note vanished before sunrise. A damaged sedan sat near the bridge. Yet somehow, through every interview, every search, every official review, Thomas Rowan's name slipped unnoticed through the cracks. Mercer stepped back and studied the wall. The investigation was beginning to resemble a puzzle assembled upside down. The pieces had always been there. No one had ever bothered to turn them over. Then his office telephone rang. The display showed no caller ID. He answered without speaking. A calm, elderly voice broke the silence. You finally found Thomas. Mercer's expression hardened. Who is this? A brief pause. Stopped looking at what was written. The voice remained steady. Start looking at what was erased. The line went dead. Mercer slowly lowered the receiver. His eyes drifted back to the evidence board. Not a single clue had come from discovering something new. Every breakthrough had come from finding something that had been overlooked, removed, sanded away, or quietly forgotten. Somewhere inside the original case file, someone had deliberately erased part of the story. And Mercer had the uneasy feeling that he had only just uncovered the first missing page. Mercer did not leave the courthouse that night. The anonymous phone call echoed through his mind with every page he turned. Stop looking at what was written. Start looking at what was erased. It sounded less like a threat and more like advice. He unlocked the oldest evidence cabinet in the archive. Most of the folders inside had not been opened in decades. The cardboard had become brittle. Labels had faded almost to white. One box carried a handwritten note. Working documents, not filed. Mercer frowned. Working documents were never meant to become permanent evidence. Detectives used them while interviewing witnesses, then discarded them after official reports were completed. Yet this box had survived. He lifted the lid. Inside were loose sheets covered with handwritten observations, times, addresses, phone numbers, quick sketches of intersections, coffee stains, mud marks. Nothing organized. Exactly the kind of notes investigators made before they knew which details mattered. Mercer began reading from the top. Most pages contained ordinary reminders. Recheck weather report. Confirm library closing time. Interview gas station owner. Then one page caught his attention. Across the top someone had written in thick black pencil, bulletin board. Below it appeared 3 short lines. Paper removed before 6:20 a.m. Thumbtack still present. Possible witness? The final line had been crossed out so heavily that the paper nearly tore. Mercer carried it beneath a forensic light. The indentation remained. He adjusted the angle. Slowly, faint pencil grooves emerged. Not every letter. Just enough. That girl on bicycle. Mercer immediately searched the witness index. No child riding a bicycle had ever been interviewed. He checked school records from 1981. Morning newspaper routes. Youth volunteer lists. Nothing. The missing witness had disappeared before ever entering the official investigation. Mercer leaned back in his chair. How many others had vanished the same way? He continued digging. Another notebook. Another crossed-out page. This time the heading read, Bridge traffic. Every vehicle seen near Black Creek had been listed. Pickup truck, delivery van, school bus, unknown sedan. One line had been completely covered with correction fluid. Mercer carefully tilted the page beneath ultraviolet light. The erased ink slowly became visible. County maintenance truck. No license number. No driver. Just 4 words that had never reached the final report. He searched maintenance records. According to county logs, no maintenance crews had been assigned to Black Creek Bridge that evening. Someone had either written the wrong vehicle, or someone later decided it shouldn't appear. The deeper Mercer looked, the stranger the omissions became. Witnesses disappeared. Vehicle notes vanished. Entire interview references ended mid-sentence. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just tiny absences scattered across hundreds of pages. Each one easy to overlook. Together, they formed a pattern. Around midnight, Helen returned carrying 2 cups of coffee. You still here? Mercer smiled tiredly. I think someone edited this investigation before it was finished. Helen placed 1 cup beside him. You know what old archivists fear most. What? Not fires. Mercer looked up. Misfiling. She tapped the evidence box. Once one document ends up in the wrong place, that people stop asking where it belongs. Her words lingered long after she walked away. Mercer stood and crossed into the archive stacks. Rows of gray shelves stretched into darkness. Every case file occupied its assigned location, unless he began checking neighboring shelves instead of the Harper case itself. Property disputes, traffic accidents, missing livestock, routine reports from October 1981. Half an hour later, he found something unusual. A traffic citation file felt heavier than it should. Inside, tucked between two unrelated reports, rested a folded interview transcript. The cover page had no case number, no filing stamp, only a date, October 18th, 1981. Mercer unfolded it carefully. The witness identified herself only as Mary Collins, age 13. His pulse quickened. The bicycle witness. She told investigators she had crossed Black Creek Bridge shortly after the library closed. Most of her statement described the rain. Then one paragraph stopped Mercer cold. I saw Miss Harper talking to a man near the bulletin board. They weren't arguing. She looked surprised. He pointed toward the bridge. I kept writing because the rain was getting heavy. Mercer continued reading. The man wore a dark work jacket with reflective stripes on the sleeves. Reflective stripes. Mercer's eyes drifted back to the erased vehicle note. County maintenance crews wore reflective jackets. He turned the page. The interview ended abruptly. No follow-up questions. No detective signature. The final page was missing. Someone had removed it. Mercer closed his eyes for a moment. Another erased ending. Another missing piece. He pinned Mary's statement beside the bulletin board photograph. The investigation board was changing. Not because new evidence kept appearing. Because forgotten evidence kept finding its way home. Outside, the courthouse clock struck 1 in the morning. The building stood silent. Mercer walked to the window overlooking Main Street. 43 years earlier, detectives believed the storm had washed away the truth. Now, he understood something different. The rain hadn't erased the trail. People had. And somewhere in the thousands of forgotten pages, still waiting inside the archive, the missing final page of Mary Collins's interview was almost certainly waiting to be found. Mercer remained in the archive until the courthouse lights shut off one floor at a time. The old building settled into silence. Heating pipes clicked behind the walls. Floorboards creaked without footsteps. Outside, wind carried dead leaves across the courthouse steps, scraping against a stone like whispered conversations. He spread every recovered page across 3 long tables. Official reports occupied the first. Working notes filled the second. Misfiled documents covered the third. For the first time since reopening the Harper investigation, he stopped reading chronologically. Instead, he arranged every document by the exact minute described. 7:45 p.m., 8 p.m., 8:15 p.m., 8:30 p.m. Slowly, the evening of October 17th, 1981 came back to life. The grocery store closed at 7:55. The diner served its final customer at 8:04. Heavy rain began shortly after 8:10. The church bell rang at 8:30. Library lights switched off at 8:37. Walter Briggs photographed the bulletin board around 8:45. Mary Collins crossed the bridge several minutes later. By 9:15, Evelyn Harper had disappeared. Mercer stepped back. The timeline looked complete, yet one gap remained. Exactly 21 minutes. From 8:46 until 9:07. No report, no witness, no confirmed movement, nothing. He circled the empty space with a red pencil. That's where you disappeared, he whispered. The next morning, Mercer drove to the old Shadow Ridge Public Library. The building had been renovated twice since 1981, but its brick walls and tall front windows remained unchanged. The current librarian, Nora Bennett, unlocked the doors before sunrise. You called about old maintenance records. Mercer nodded. I'm looking for anything that wasn't thrown away. Nora smiled. Librarians are terrible at throwing things away. She led him into a basement storage room lined with steel shelving. Boxes filled every corner. Old circulation cards, book catalogs, employee schedules, annual reports. Mercer spent nearly 3 hours searching through dust-covered cartons. Most contained exactly what he expected, until he opened a faded file labeled Community Events, Autumn 1981. Inside rested flyers, newspaper clippings, handwritten volunteer lists, and a folded seating chart. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. Then Mercer noticed a handwritten note across the bottom. Bulletin board keys issued. He frowned. Keys. Nora looked over his shoulder. The old bulletin board had a glass cover. Mercer froze. What? Before the new one was installed. She pointed toward the maintenance log. The original board locked. After repeated vandalism, they replaced it with an open cork board. Mercer immediately checked the dates. The replacement occurred October 16th, one day before Evelyn disappeared. He looked up. So for years, only staff could post notices. Correct. And after the replacement, anyone could. Mercer's pulse quickened. The anonymous message had appeared during the first 24 hours the board became publicly accessible. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone had been waiting for that exact opportunity. He searched deeper into the event file. Another envelope slipped free. Inside were volunteer sign-in sheets from the library's annual history exhibit. Names filled the pages. Teachers, parents, students, local businesses. One signature immediately caught his attention. Thomas Rowan. Reason for visit. Install display panels. Mercer checked the date. October 17th, 1981. The very day Evelyn vanished. Thomas had been inside the library, not repairing the bulletin board, working only a few rooms away from Evelyn herself. Yet not one witness had ever mentioned seeing him. Mercer requested the original floor plans. The temporary history exhibit occupied the East Reading Hall. A narrow service corridor connected it directly to the employee exit, hidden from public view. He walked the corridor slowly. The hallway still existed. Fresh paint covered the walls, but the layout remained unchanged. Halfway through the passage, he stopped. One old cork strip survived beneath newer drywall. Tiny pinholes covered its surface. Someone had once used it for staff notices. Mercer ran his flashlight along the edge. A small object reflected the beam. Wedged deep inside the wooden trim rested an old brass thumbtack. Its head was tarnished green with age. He carefully removed it using tweezers. The point was slightly bent. Not enough to identify anything, but enough to raise another question. How many notices had hung here before reaching the public bulletin board outside? He slipped the tack into an evidence envelope. Sometimes the smallest object survived because nobody believed it mattered. As he prepared to leave, Nora called from the circulation desk. Detective. He turned. I almost forgot. She reached beneath the counter and produced a thin notebook wrapped in faded blue cloth. We found this during the second renovation 20 years ago. Mercer accepted it carefully. No one could identify the owner. The cover contained no title, only two initials embossed in worn gold letters. H. Mercer's heartbeat slowed. Inside, most pages listed books scheduled for repair. Library inventory. Children's reading events. Ordinary entries. Then near the back, the handwriting changed. The notes became shorter, more hurried. One entry, dated only 3 days before Evelyn disappeared, filled barely half a page. Someone keeps asking for maps that don't exist anymore. When I tell them they've been removed from circulation, they always ask the same question. Who decided they should disappear? Mercer stared at the words. Another page followed. Blank. Then another. Blank again. Finally, pressed between the final sheets, he found a brittle maple leaf. Wrapped inside, it was a tiny folded piece of paper no larger than a postage stamp. He unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence had been written in pencil. If anything happens, don't trust the copies. Mercer looked up slowly. Every clue since reopening the case had pointed toward one unsettling possibility. Someone hadn't merely hidden the truth. Someone had been quietly replacing it. And Evelyn Harper had realized it, just days before she vanished. The maple leaf trembled between Mercer's fingers, not because of the wind. There was no wind inside the library, only silence. The note was barely larger than a postage stamp, yet its single sentence carried more weight than every official report stacked inside the courthouse archive. If anything happens, don't trust the copies. Mercer folded it carefully and slipped it into a fresh evidence sleeve. He no longer believed Evelyn Harper had stumbled into a crime. She had stumbled into a history someone had been quietly rewriting. Not history taught in schools, not history printed in books. The ordinary history of Shadow Ridge. The kind hidden inside filing cabinets, handwritten ledgers, property maps, forgotten letters, and dusty shelves where no one ever looked twice. Outside, afternoon clouds swallowed the sun. The town seemed quieter than usual. Even Main Street felt strangely distant, as though every sound had been softened beneath a heavy blanket of rain. Mercer drove directly to the old Municipal Records building. Unlike the courthouse, the structure had been abandoned for years. Broken windows stared across an empty parking lot. Vines climbed the cracked brick walls. A faded bronze plaque still hung beside the entrance. Shadow Ridge Municipal Records Office. Closed in 1998. Most surviving documents had supposedly been transferred to the county archive. Supposedly. Mercer pushed against the front door. Locked. He circled the building until he reached a loading entrance hidden behind overgrown shrubs. The padlock had rusted away long ago. The door opened with a slow groan. Dust floated through narrow beams of light, cutting across the darkness. Rows of empty metal shelves stretched into the distance. Most records had indeed been removed. Most. In the far corner stood a single cabinet too heavy to move. Every drawer remained shut. Mercer pulled the first one open. Tax receipts. The second, election notices. The third refused to budge. He tugged harder. Still nothing. Something inside blocked the drawer. Using a flashlight, he looked through the narrow opening. A cardboard folder had fallen sideways years earlier, jamming the mechanism. After several minutes of careful effort, the drawer finally slid open. The folder carried no official label, only a handwritten word. Originals. Mercer's heartbeat quickened. Inside lay dozens of aging documents, each paired with a newer copy. Property deeds, survey maps, building permits. The differences were subtle. A signature slightly altered, a handwritten note missing, a date corrected, a boundary line shifted only a few feet. None of the changes looked significant alone. Together they transformed the history of the entire town. Mercer spread several maps across the dusty floor. One version showed Black Creek flowing west of Miller Farm. The replacement showed it flowing east. The newer map matched every official record used today. The older map matched family photographs taken decades earlier. One of them had to be wrong. He photographed everything. Then something caught his eye beneath the cabinet. A thin leather notebook had slipped into the narrow gap between the floor and the bottom drawer. Its cover had no title. Inside were neat handwritten entries signed only with the initials RV, not Richard Vale. In this fictional town, the initials belonged to Robert Vale, the municipal archivist who disappeared from public life in the early 1980s after quietly resigning from his position. Mercer began reading. There are two archives. One preserves memory. The other preserves convenience. Most people never notice the difference. Another page. Copies slowly replace originals. Eventually, the copies become accepted as truth. Anyone questioning them is told they simply remember incorrectly. Mercer turned the page faster. Miss Harper asked to see the original township survey. I told her it had been destroyed in the flood. That was a lie. I had already hidden it. Mercer stopped breathing for a moment. Robert Vale had known Evelyn. He had lied to protect something. Or someone. The next pages describe quiet meetings inside the library basement after closing time. No conspiracies. No criminal organization. Only two people try and compare fading records before more originals disappeared forever. One sentence stood out from the rest. We are no longer searching for missing papers. We are searching for the person replacing them. Mercer closed the notebook. That single sentence changed everything. The mystery wasn't about stolen documents. It was about substituted ones. Someone had never needed to destroy the past. Replacing it had been enough. A loud thud echoed somewhere above him. Mercer immediately switched off his flashlight. Silence. Then another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Crossing the wooden floor of the abandoned building. He remained perfectly still. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Another footstep. Closer. Someone else was inside. Mercer quietly slipped the notebook into his coat and moved behind a row of rusted filing cabinets. The footsteps stopped. A beam of light swept across the room. Not sunlight, a flashlight. Someone searched the archive with calm, deliberate movements, pausing at every cabinet Mercer had already opened. The stranger said nothing. Mercer listened. A drawer opened. Papers rustled. Then a quiet voice, barely above a whisper, echoed through the empty records hall. Too late. The beam disappeared. Footsteps retreated toward the loading entrance. By the time Mercer reached the doorway, the visitor had vanished. Outside, fresh rain had begun to fall. Only a single set of tire tracks cut through the wet gravel, disappearing toward the mountains beyond Shadow Ridge. Mercer looked down at the notebook hidden inside his coat. The investigation had crossed an invisible line. Until now, he had been recovering forgotten evidence. Now someone knew he was recovering it. And somewhere beyond the rain-soaked hills, another person was searching for the same forgotten history. One determined to preserve it, and one equally determined to erase it forever. Mercer followed the tire tracks until the pavement ended. The road narrowed into a ribbon of cracked asphalt, twisting through dense pine forest. Rain washed across the windshield in heavy sheets, blurring the mountains into dark silhouettes. Every few hundred yards, the tracks became fainter, then reappeared where the mud deepened. Whoever had left the abandoned records office knew the back roads. They never exceeded the speed limit. They never braked suddenly. No panic, no hesitation. Just the calm confidence of someone who had driven this route many times before. 5 miles outside Shadow Ridge, the tracks turned onto an abandoned logging road. Mercer stopped. Fresh branches blocked the entrance. Too fresh. They hadn't fallen naturally. Someone had dragged them across the road only hours earlier. He climbed out into the cold rain and pulled them aside one by one. Beneath the branches lay fresh tire impressions, still sharply defined. The trail continued. The logging road climbed steadily through the forest until it reached a clearing overlooking the valley. From there, Mercer could see the entire town below. The courthouse, the church steeple, Black Creek, winding between rows of aging houses. The library where Evelyn Harper had last been seen. It struck him immediately. Whoever came here wasn't hiding. They were watching. Near the edge of the clearing stood an abandoned fire lookout tower. Its wooden staircase groaned beneath Mercer's weight as he climbed. The observation room at the top had long since been stripped of equipment, but one object remained. An old brass telescope pointed directly toward Shadow Ridge. Beside it rested a weathered notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Mercer opened it carefully. The first page contained no name, only a date. October 2nd, 1981. Each following page recorded observations of the town. Library lights on at 8:32. School buses arriving. Delivery trucks entering Main Street. Church meetings. Town council gatherings. No explanations, only meticulous notes. Someone had watched Shadow Ridge every day for weeks. Mercer turned another page. The entries became more focused. October 15th. She requested the original survey again. October 16th. Replacement bulletin board installed. October 17th. She agreed to meet after closing. Mercer's pulse quickened. The notebook ended there. No final entry. No signature. Just several blank pages. He searched the tower more carefully. The floorboards were coated with dust except for one narrow strip leading toward the rear wall. Someone had been here recently, very recently. Behind an old storage cabinet, he found a metal box bolted to the floor. It wasn't locked. Inside were dozens of photographic negatives protected by wax paper. He held the first strip against the gray daylight. The town square. Another. The library entrance. Another. Black Creek Bridge. Frame after frame documented ordinary moments over many years. Children crossing the street. Neighbors talking outside grocery stores. Seasonal festivals. Snowstorms. Summer parades. An entire town captured quietly from a distance. Then Mercer found a negative unlike the others. It showed Evelyn Harper standing outside the library. She wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, his face hidden beneath the brim of a rain-soaked hat. They appear to be studying a folded map spread across the hood of a pickup truck. Neither looked frightened. Neither appeared to be arguing. Whatever happened later, this meeting had begun peacefully. Mercer slipped the negative into a protective sleeve. Someone had possessed this photograph for decades without sharing it. Why? He looked around the tower one final time. Pinned beneath the windowsill by a rusted nail was a tiny scrap of paper almost overlooked by time. Only 4 handwritten words remained legible. Truth needs witnesses. The handwriting matched Robert Vale's journal. Mercer folded the note into his pocket. Thunder rolled across the valley. As he descended the tower, a distant engine echoed through the trees. He froze. A dark pickup emerged briefly between the pines before disappearing around a bend. Too far away to identify. Too fast to follow on foot. By the time Mercer reached his vehicle, the forest had fallen silent again. He looked back toward the empty lookout tower. The notebook, the negatives, the telescope. None of them felt abandoned. They felt maintained, as though someone had expected another investigator to arrive one day and continue where the last guardian had stopped. Mercer started the engine and turned toward Shadow Ridge. He no longer believed he was solving a single mystery. He was uncovering a chain of forgotten custodians, ordinary people who had quietly preserved fragments of the town's true history, each passing them to the next before disappearing into obscurity. And somewhere ahead, hidden among those fragments, waited the missing piece that connected Evelyn Harper's final evening to the silent watcher who had just slipped away through the rain. The pickup disappeared into the curtain of rain before Mercer could read the license plate. He didn't chase it. Not yet. Experience had taught him that desperate investigators often ran past a clue they needed most. He climbed back into the lookout tower one final time. This time he ignored the notebook, ignored the telescope, ignored the photographs. Instead, he studied the room itself. Every guardian who had hidden evidence in Shadow Ridge had followed the same habit. They never hid secrets inside obvious places. They hid them inside ordinary ones. Mercer walked slowly around the circular room. His flashlight lingered over warped floorboards, old electrical outlets, a cracked cast-iron stove. Nothing. Then he noticed something odd. One wall carried 6 layers of faded paint. Another carried only 5. He tapped the boards. Solid, solid, solid. Then one section answered with a hollow echo. Mercer slid a pocket knife into the narrow gap. The panel shifted. Behind it waited a shallow compartment no larger than a suitcase. Inside rested a small tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Unlike every discovery before it, this one bore a handwritten warning across the lid. For the next keeper. Mercer opened it carefully. There were no photographs, no maps, only cassette tapes. Dozens of them, each labeled with a date. 1981, 1982, 1983, 1984, 1985. One tape carried no date at all, only a single sentence. Play this last. Mercer smiled to himself. Someone had spent decades thinking several moves ahead. He packed the tapes into his bag and drove straight to the courthouse. The evidence lab still contained an old cassette player used for preserving historical recordings. He inserted the earliest tape. Static filled the speakers. Then a man's calm voice emerged. If you're listening to this, then the archive survived. Mercer immediately recognized a voice from Robert Vale's journal. I stopped writing because paper can disappear. Voices are harder to erase. The recording continued. I've hidden pieces of our history throughout Shadow Ridge, not because they're valuable, but because memory is fragile. Every generation forgets a little more than the last. The tape clicked. Silence. Mercer loaded the second recording. This one contained interviews with elderly residents recalling buildings that no longer existed, streets that had been renamed, families that had moved away. Nothing sounded important. Yet Mercer realized every memory corrected small mistakes found in the official records. The third tape was different. Rain echoed in the background. A woman laughed softly. Then she spoke. My name is Evelyn Harper. Mercer's hand froze over the controls. This recording isn't evidence, Evelyn said. It's insurance. If someone ever tells you that the originals never existed, they're lying. I've seen them. They're real. Paper rustled. I don't know who's replacing the records yet, but I know why. A long pause followed. When people lose their past, they'll believe whatever history remains. The tape ended abruptly with a loud metallic bang. Then silence. Mercer stared at the recorder. For the first time since reopening the mystery, he wasn't hearing theories. He was hearing Evelyn herself. Outside, the courthouse clock struck midnight. Somewhere beyond the rain-soaked streets of Shadow Ridge, someone else had spent decades protecting the same truth. And Mercer finally understood why every clue had been hidden instead of revealed. The mystery had never been about solving one forgotten night. It had always been about ensuring that, no matter how many years passed, someone would eventually remember where to start looking. Mercer replayed Evelyn's recording 3 more times. Each time he noticed something new. The scrape of a chair, a distant clock chiming, rain striking a metal roof. She hadn't recorded the message in the library. The acoustics were wrong. He reached for a pair of headphones and listened again, this time ignoring her words. There, a faint whistle. Low, rhythmic, not wind, a steam pipe. Somewhere beneath the recording, machinery hummed steadily for nearly 20 seconds before fading away. Mercer closed his eyes. He had heard that sound before, not recently. Years ago, the old municipal power station on the edge of Shadow Ridge had used identical steam lines before it was decommissioned. Most of the building had been abandoned. He checked historical utility records. One section of the station had remained active until the early 1990s because it housed the town's emergency document storage during renovations at the courthouse. His pulse quickened. Another archive, another forgotten building, another place where originals and copies might cross paths. Before sunrise, Mercer drove toward the river. Fog drifted over the abandoned industrial district, swallowing brick smokestacks and rusted rail sidings. The power station stood exactly as he remembered it. Its tall windows broken, its steel doors stained with decades of rain. Inside, silence echoed to the enormous turbine hall. Massive generators sat frozen beneath layers of dust. Broken gauges still hung from cracked control panels. Mercer moved slowly, sweeping his flashlight across the cavernous room. Nothing. Then he noticed footprints. Fresh. Only one set. They crossed the dust-covered floor without hesitation, disappearing behind an old electrical switchboard. Someone had been here within the last day. He followed. Behind the switchboard lay a narrow maintenance corridor. The air felt noticeably warmer. At the far end stood a reinforced steel door marked only with faded stencil paint. Record storage, basement level. The lock had been cut years earlier. Mercer pushed the door open. Metal stairs descended into darkness. His flashlight revealed shelves stretching far beyond the beam. Boxes, hundreds of them. Many had collapsed with age. Others remained perfectly stacked. Each carried handwritten inventory numbers instead of official county labels. Mercer opened the nearest carton. Old engineering drawings. The next contained payroll ledgers. The third held oversized survey maps rolled inside cardboard tubes. Everything appeared ordinary until he found a wooden crate stamped with single black triangle. The same symbol Evelyn had sketched repeatedly in her notebook. He knelt beside it. The lid lifted easily. Inside were dozens of document folders tied together with blue cotton ribbon. Across the first folder someone had written in careful block letters, Master Index, Original Holdings. Mercer's breathing slowed. He untied the ribbon. The index listed every original document that had once belonged to Shadow Ridge. Beside each entry appeared one of 3 handwritten marks. A check, a circle, or an X. No explanation, just symbols. He turned another page. Property surveys, school records, birth registries, council minutes, old photographs. Some carried check marks, others circles. Many had XS. At the bottom of the final page, a note had been added years later in blue ink. If an original disappears, compare every surviving copy. Mercer smiled faintly. Robert Vale, The handwriting matched perfectly. He searched deeper into the crate. Beneath the index rested a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To whoever finds this next." Inside was a folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained sharp. History doesn't vanish all at once. It disappears quietly. One page replaced, one map corrected, one photograph cropped, one memory dismissed. By the time anyone notices, the truth has already become a rumor. Mercer folded the letter carefully. A sudden metallic clang echoed from somewhere above. He switched off his flashlight. Silence. Then came another sound. Footsteps. Slow, measured, crossing the steel walkway overhead. Mercer remained perfectly still between the towering shelves. The footsteps paused. A flashlight beam swept briefly across the stairwell before moving away again. Whoever it was never called out, never searched carelessly. They moved through the building like someone who already knew its layout. After several long minutes, an engine started outside. The sound faded into the morning fog. Mercer waited another minute before climbing the stairs. Outside, the gravel remained wet from the night's rain. Fresh tire tracks curved toward the highway. He watched them disappear into the distance. For the second time in 2 days, he had arrived moments after someone else had left. It no longer felt like coincidence. Somewhere in Shadow Ridge, another keeper of forgotten history was following the same trail, always one step ahead, never leaving enough behind to reveal who they were, only enough to ensure the story continued. Mercer looked back at the abandoned power station. The investigation had become something larger than a search for answers. It had become a race between those who preserved memory and those who quietly reshaped it. And with every hidden archive he uncovered, the line between those two groups grew harder to see. Mercer returned to the courthouse just before sunrise. The town remained asleep beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Coffee steamed from a paper cup on his desk as he spread the newly discovered documents across the evidence board. Every hidden archive had revealed the same pattern. No dramatic confession. No miraculous breakthrough. Only fragments. Quiet fragments that refused to disappear. He stepped back. The board no longer resembled a criminal investigation. It looked like the history of an entire town slowly putting itself back together. The library, the lookout tower, the abandoned records office, the power station. Each place guarded a different piece of the same forgotten story. Mercer's eyes drifted toward the old map hanging beside the board. For locations, for discoveries. The points almost formed a circle around the center of Shadow Ridge. Almost. One corner remained empty. There had to be a fifth location. He pulled out Robert Vale's notebook again. This time he ignored every paragraph. Instead, he examined the margins. Robert had a peculiar habit. Whenever he finished an important thought, he drew a tiny compass. North, east, south, west, except once. Near the final pages, the compass pointed northeast. No explanation, just a tiny arrow. Mercer laid the notebook over a county survey. The angle matched a narrow stretch of woodland outside town, an area once occupied by the original Shadow Ridge Historical Museum before fire destroyed it decades earlier. According to every official record, nothing remained. Mercer drove there immediately. The road ended at a rusted gate, swallowed by vines. Beyond it stood little more than broken stone foundations scattered among towering oak trees. Rainwater collected inside collapsed basements. Nature had reclaimed almost everything. Almost. Near the center of the ruin stood a solitary stone chimney. Unlike everything else, it remained perfectly intact. Mercer walked around it slowly. The bricks looked older than the surrounding foundation. Someone had repaired them. Recently, one brick carried the familiar black triangle. He pressed it. Nothing. He tapped the surrounding stones. Most answered with a dull thud. One echoed hollow. Mercer removed several loose bricks. Behind them lay a narrow iron box sealed against moisture. Inside rested dozens of rolled architectural drawings tied with faded ribbon. Beneath them lay a single leather folder. Across the cover someone had written in elegant handwriting, "The Fifth Archive." Mercer opened it carefully. The first page contained no names, only one sentence. Every town remembers what it celebrates. He turned another page. Every town forgets what it fears. Another. Neither memory is complete. Folded inside the folder rested a panoramic photograph. Shadow Ridge. Summer. Children running across the square. Families eating together. Musicians performing beside the courthouse. An ordinary festival. Mercer smiled. Nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed the date. October 17th, 1980. Exactly 1 year before Evelyn disappeared. He studied the crowd through a magnifying glass. Hundreds of faces. Teachers, shop owners, farmers, students. Then, near the edge of the photograph, stood Evelyn Harper. Beside her stood Robert Vale. And beside Robert, not a third person whose face had been carefully cut from the photograph with a razor blade decades earlier. Only the empty outline remained. Someone had removed themselves from history. Mercer slowly lowered the picture. That wasn't an accident. It wasn't damage caused by time. It was deliberate. The unknown figure had erased their own image while leaving everyone else untouched. At the bottom of the folder rested one final envelope. Mercer unfolded the brittle paper inside. The handwriting was unfamiliar. If you are reading this, then you have found every place we hoped would survive. Do not waste your life searching for the missing face. The person no longer matters. What matters is remembering that someone once stood there. Mercer looked again at the empty space in the old photograph. The missing figure had become more powerful through absence than they ever could have through recognition. Outside, the wind moved gently through the ruined museum. Leaves drifted across broken stone paths. The forgotten town refused to stay silent. Every archive, every journal, every hidden photograph, every preserved memory had led to the same truth. Shadow Ridge had never been protected by one guardian. It had always been protected by ordinary people who believed that even if names vanished, that the truth deserved to be remembered. Mercer carried the leather folder back to the courthouse with a strange sense of calm. For weeks he had believed he was chasing a destination. Now he understood he had been following a trail left deliberately incomplete. Every archive had answered one question while quietly asking another. The evidence board occupied nearly an entire wall. Maps overlapped photographs. Journal pages covered engineering drawings. Strings connected places that no longer existed. Anyone walking into the office would assume Mercer had become obsessed. Perhaps he had. He switched off the overhead lights. Only a desk lamp illuminated the room. In the softer light, something caught his attention. One length of red string cast a shadow across Robert Vale's notebook. The shadow landed directly on a sentence Mercer had somehow overlooked despite reading it dozens of times. Every archive begins where another one ends. He opened each recovered notebook side by side. Library, lookout tower, municipal records, power station, museum. The final page of each contained a small sketch. Individually, they appeared meaningless. One looked like a staircase. Another resembled a doorway. The third showed only a circle. Mercer copied each drawing onto tracing paper. He stacked the pages together. The shapes aligned perfectly. Not into a symbol, into a floor plan. He hurried to the county survey cabinet and searched through architectural records. After nearly an hour, he found an 80-year-old blueprint. The match was exact. The sketches formed the layout of the original Shadow Ridge Town Hall. Before renovations, buried its lower level beneath new construction. Mercer stared at the blueprint. A forgotten basement. No modern plan showed it. According to official records, the space had been filled with concrete during remodeling in 1964. But the original blueprint told another story. A narrow staircase still connected the courthouse archives to the abandoned basement, hidden behind a storage wall. He grabbed a flashlight. The courthouse was almost empty. Only the night custodian remained upstairs, humming softly while polishing the marble hallway. Mercer descended into the archive. Rows of shelves stretched before him. He walked to the oldest corner of the basement, where unused furniture stood beneath dusty canvas sheets. According to the blueprint, The hidden staircase should have been directly behind a row of obsolete filing cabinets. He pushed the first cabinet. Too heavy. The second shifted slightly. Dust poured onto the floor. Behind it appeared an old brick wall interrupted by a narrow wooden door almost perfectly concealed beneath peeling paint. No handle, only a recessed iron ring. Mercer pulled. The door opened with a deep groan that echoed through the darkness below. Cold air drifted upward. He shined his flashlight down the staircase. Stone steps disappeared beneath the courthouse. Cobwebs stretched from wall to wall. No footprints marked the dust, at least none that were recent. Mercer descended carefully. The staircase ended inside a circular chamber lined with wooden shelves. Unlike every other archive, this room held almost nothing. One table, one chair, one lantern, one enormous ledger resting alone beneath a layer of gray dust. Across its cover, embossed in fading gold letters, were 4 simple words: The Book of Keepers. Mercer opened it. Every page listed a name. Not famous people, not officials, ordinary citizens, teachers, postal workers, mechanics, nurses, librarians. Beside each name appeared only 2 dates. The day they accepted responsibility, the day they quietly passed it to someone else. No explanation, no ceremony, just a continuous chain stretching back more than a century. Mercer's eyes stopped on a familiar entry. Robert Vale, accepted 1969, passed on 1981. The next line read, Evelyn Harper, accepted October 12, 1981. The final column remained blank. She had never recorded a successor. Mercer slowly turned the final page. It was empty, except for a fountain pen resting neatly across the center. No note accompanied it. No instructions. Only a blank line waiting for another name. Mercer looked around the silent chamber. For the first time since the investigation began, the mystery no longer felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. It felt like a promise waiting to be kept. Far above, the courthouse clock struck midnight. The sound drifted faintly through the old stone walls. Mercer closed the ledger gently. Outside, Shadow Ridge slept peacefully, unaware that beneath its streets lay a forgotten room where generations of ordinary people had quietly protected the memories of an entire town. Not through secrets, not through power, but through the simple belief that history only survives when someone chooses to remember it. Mercer remained in the underground chamber long after the courthouse clock finished striking midnight. The silence was different here. Not empty, patient. The kind of silence found inside old churches, forgotten libraries, and places where time seemed to move more slowly than the rest of the world. He ran his fingers across the cover of the Book of Keepers once more. The leather had been repaired many times. Different thread, different hands, different decades. Every repair told the same story. Someone had always returned. Someone had always chosen to preserve what others overlooked. Mercer closed the ledger and lifted the lantern from the center of the table. The flame had long since died, yet the glass remained surprisingly clean. Someone had maintained this room far more recently than the dust suggested. His flashlight swept across the circular chamber. The walls appeared solid at first glance. Old limestone, heavy timber beams, shelves carved directly into stone. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed shallow grooves running along the floor. Perfectly straight. Too straight to be natural. He crouched beside them. The grooves disappeared beneath the massive table supporting the ledger. Mercer placed both hands against the oak table and pushed. It barely moved. He tried again with more force. The ancient wood slid several inches. A deep, grinding sound echoed beneath the chamber. Dust drifted lazily from the ceiling. The grooves continued beneath the table toward the opposite wall, hidden for decades, perhaps longer. As the table shifted farther aside, a square iron hatch appeared beneath it. No lock, no handle, only another engraved black triangle. Mercer smiled to himself. Every archive had hidden another. Every ending had quietly become another beginning. Using the tip of a crowbar stored beside the shelves, he lifted the hatch. Cold air rushed upward. A narrow stone shaft descended into darkness. The flashlight beam disappeared before reaching the bottom. He climbed carefully. 20 steps. 30. 40. Finally, the passage opened into a chamber unlike anything he had yet discovered. It was an archive. It was a workshop. Long wooden benches lined both walls. Ancient drafting tools rested exactly where someone had left them. Surveying instruments, ink bottles, metal rulers, boxes of photographic plates, printing stamps, bookbinding presses. The room smelled faintly of leather and cedar despite decades underground. Mercer slowly walked between the workbenches. Everything remained organized with almost impossible precision. One shelf contained blank journals identical to Robert Vale's. Another held unused map tubes. Another stored hundreds of glass negatives waiting to be developed. At the center of the workshop stood a large drafting table illuminated by a single skylight, no wider than a dinner plate. Moonlight streamed through the opening above. Resting on the table lay an unfinished map of Shadow Ridge. Modern roads had been drawn, old roads carefully erased. Beside the map sat a sharpened pencil. Fresh shavings still curled across the tabletop. Mercer stopped. Someone had been working here. Recently, he touched the pencil. It rolled gently beneath his fingertips. No dust, no moisture. Whoever had used it could not have been gone for very long. He searched the room methodically. A kettle remained on an iron stove. Cold, but clean. A chair had been pushed back only slightly, as though its occupant intended to return within minutes. An open notebook rested beside the map. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Neat, deliberate. The final entry read, "If Mercer reaches his room, the chain remains unbroken." His heart skipped. The notebook continued. He will expect answers. Instead, he must learn the harder lesson. History cannot be protected by one person forever. Mercer slowly lowered the notebook. Someone knew he was coming. Not by chance. By design. Every clue, every hidden archive, every forgotten photograph, every misplaced document had quietly guided him here. Not to solve a mystery, to inherit one. A faint creak echoed somewhere beyond the workshop. Mercer immediately switched off his flashlight. Moonlight alone filled the room. Another creak. Soft footsteps approached through the stone corridor. Steady, unhurried, Mercer remained motionless beside the drafting table. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway. Neither person spoke. Several long seconds passed. Finally, an elderly voice broke the silence. "You found every archive." Mercer recognized neither the voice nor the face that slowly appeared in the doorway. The woman looked to be nearly 80 years old. Silver hair, dark wool coat, walking stick polished smooth by decades of use. She smiled warmly, not with surprise, with relief. I wondered whether anyone still knew how to follow the trail. Mercer lowered his flashlight. "Who are you?" She stepped into the moonlight and rested one hand upon the unfinished map. "My name is Eleanor Ashcroft." She looked around the quiet workshop with unmistakable affection. "I've been waiting for the next keeper." Mercer glanced toward the notebook. "The message. I wrote it. You knew I would come." She nodded. "Not you specifically. Just someone who still believed forgotten things were worth finding." The old woman carefully rolled up the unfinished map and handed it to Mercer. "The work isn't finished." He accepted the map without speaking. Outside, beyond the hidden chamber, beyond the courthouse walls, beyond the sleeping streets of Shadow Ridge, dawn slowly approached. For the first time in decades, the town's forgotten history no longer rested in abandoned archives or hidden rooms. It rested in living hands once again. And somewhere above them, as the first rays of morning touched the rooftops, Shadow Ridge awakened to another ordinary day, never realizing that beneath its quiet streets, a promise carried across generations had just found its newest guardian. The first light of dawn filtered through the narrow skylight, painting a pale stripe across the unfinished map. Neither Mercer nor Eleanor spoke for several moments. The silence carried no tension, only the quiet understanding that some conversations demanded patience before words. Eleanor rested both hands on the worn drafting table. "When Robert found me," she said softly, "I was younger than you are now." Mercer looked up. He never intended to become a keeper. No one does. Her smile was almost imperceptible. It begins with curiosity, then responsibility. Eventually, you realize the two can no longer be separated. She gestured toward the shelves surrounding them. Everything you discover was placed exactly where it needed to be. The library, the lookout tower, the abandoned records office, the museum, the power station. Each archive protected only one fragment. Mercer unfolded the unfinished map once more. Why separate them? Eleanor walked to a nearby cabinet and removed a small wooden puzzle box. She placed it on the table. "If I handed you every piece at once," she opened the lid, "that you might believe the answer too easily." Inside lay dozens of carved wooden pieces. Mercer began fitting them together. At first they resembled random geometric shapes. Slowly they formed the outline of Shadow Ridge. Roads, hills, Black Creek, the courthouse. Then something unexpected appeared. Beneath the familiar town emerged another network of passages, tunnels, forgotten foundations, and abandoned corridors connecting buildings that modern maps showed as completely separate. Mercer stared at it. So much of the town that was built on top of itself. Eleanor finished. Every generation demolished something. Every generation buried something. And every generation forgot something. She returned the final wooden piece to the box. Our duty was never to stop change. It was only to remember what came before. Mercer looked around the underground workshop. "What happens now?" Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Now you write." He frowned. "Write what?" "Everything." She handed him a fresh leather journal. No codes. No hidden compartments. No secret messages. Simply write the truth as you understand it. Mercer opened the blank notebook. The pages were thick, handmade, waiting. "But what if I'm wrong?" Eleanor laughed quietly. "You will be." We all were. She pointed toward the shelves. "Every journal in this room contains mistakes. But together, they tell a remarkably honest story." Mercer slowly nodded. He finally understood. The archives had never promised certainty, only continuity, only the willingness to preserve memory without pretending to possess absolute truth. A faint bell echoed through the courthouse above. 8 o'clock. Employees would begin arriving within minutes. Eleanor picked up her walking stick. "My time here is finished." Mercer looked at her. "Will I see you again?" She smiled with gentle warmth. "If Shadow Ridge remembers me, then you already will." Without another word, she disappeared into the narrow stone passage. Her footsteps grew quieter. Mercer followed only seconds later. The corridor was empty. No doors. No side passages. Only the winding staircase leading back toward the courthouse archive. He searched every corner. Nothing. It was as though Eleanor had dissolved into stone itself. Back upstairs, sunlight poured through the courthouse windows. Staff members greeted one another in the hallway. Telephones rang. Printers hummed. Life continued exactly as it had the day before. Mercer carried the unfinished map, the leather journal, and the book of keepers back into his office. He removed every strand of red string from the evidence board, every photograph, every copied document, every speculative note. In their place, he pinned a single sheet of paper. Across the top he wrote, "The Shadow Ridge Chronicle." Beneath it, in careful handwriting, he added the first entry. Every town leaves behind two histories. One is recorded in public. The other survives only because ordinary people refuse to let it disappear. Mercer closed the journal and looked through the office window. Children crossed the square on their way to school. The librarian unlocked the front doors. Shopkeepers swept their sidewalks. Nothing appeared extraordinary. Yet he now understood that every familiar street held layers invisible to hurried eyes. Every building carried forgotten stories beneath fresh paint. Every family preserved memories that would one day fade unless someone chose to write them down. Outside, a cool breeze stirred the maple trees lining Main Street. Golden leaves drifted slowly across the courthouse steps before settling quietly on the stone. Mercer watched them until the last one came to rest. The search was over. The work, at last, had begun. Days passed without another hidden archive. For the first time since Mercer had reopened Forgotten Mystery, the town stopped offering dramatic discoveries. No anonymous letters appeared beneath his office door. No mysterious phone calls interrupted the night. No forgotten journals surfaced from dusty shelves. Shadow Ridge simply lived. Children hurried to school beneath crimson maple trees. The bakery opened before sunrise, filling Main Street with the smell of fresh bread. The church bell marked every passing hour with quiet certainty. Mercer found himself watching ordinary moments differently, not as an investigator searching for clues, as a keeper searching for memories. He carried the leather journal everywhere. When Mrs. Ellison, the 89-year-old owner of the flower shop, casually mentioned that the fountain in the town square had once stood 3 blocks farther east, Mercer wrote it down. When a retired train conductor described the whistle patterns used before the railway closed, Mercer recorded every detail. When an elderly carpenter explained why every original house along Willow Lane faced the morning sun instead of the street, Mercer filled another page. None of it seemed important. Individually, together, the entries slowly transformed into something larger. A living portrait of Shadow Ridge. One rainy afternoon, a young girl wandered into the courthouse carrying an old wooden box nearly as large as she was. She couldn't have been more than 12. "My grandfather told me to bring this here." Mercer looked up from his desk. "Who was your grandfather?" The girl placed the box gently on the floor. "Samuel Brooks." Mercer's eyes widened. Samuel Brooks had served as the town's postmaster for nearly 40 years before passing away the previous winter. He said. The girl continued quietly. If a man ever started writing the real history of Shadow Ridge, this belonged to him. Mercer knelt beside the box. Inside lay hundreds of unopened envelopes, every one addressed, none mailed, some dated as far back as the 1940s. The names belonged to ordinary townspeople. Teachers, doctors, mechanics, store owners. Each envelope carried the same handwritten instruction, to be opened only if forgotten. Mercer carefully selected the oldest. Inside was a short letter. "If this reaches you, then my name has probably disappeared from the town I loved. That isn't tragedy. Forgetting names is natural. Forgetting kindness is not. Please remember that during the winter of 1947, every family on Cedar Street shared their firewood with strangers. History should remember moments like that." Mercer opened another. "My father planted the oak beside the library. Everyone thinks the council did. That never mattered to him. But perhaps one day someone should know." Another. "Tell children the river was once clear enough to see trout from the bridge. They deserve to know what was possible." Mercer smiled. There were no conspiracies. No villains. No hidden fortunes. Only ordinary people hoping that ordinary goodness would outlive them. Late that evening, Mercer carried the letters into the underground workshop. He placed them beside the Book of Keepers. For a long moment, he simply stood there. The room felt different now. Not lonely, occupied, as though every memory carefully preserved over generations lingered quietly between the shelves. He opened his journal once more. This time he wrote without hesitation. "I thought I had inherited a mystery. Instead, I inherited responsibility. The forgotten are not asking to become famous. They are only asking not to vanish completely." He closed the journal. Above him, rain tapped softly against the courthouse roof. Somewhere in the sleeping town, countless stories remained untold. Some would never be discovered. Others would arrive unexpectedly, carried inside dusty boxes, fading photographs, whether journals or the quiet recollections of people who believed no one was listening anymore. Mercer intended to listen, not because every story changed history, but because every story changed someone. Outside, the lights of Shadow Ridge glowed warmly through the mist, and for the first time in many years, the town no longer felt like a place haunted by forgotten secrets. It felt like a place patiently waiting to remember itself. Autumn surrendered quietly to winter. The mountains surrounding Shadow Ridge disappear beneath fresh snow, softening every rooftop, every fence, every forgotten footpath into smooth white shapes. The town seemed smaller beneath the silence of the season, yet Mercer's journal continued to grow thicker with each passing week. People began arriving without being asked. A retired schoolteacher brought attendance books dating back to the 1930s. A farmer carried in a rusted bell, once used to signal harvest festivals. The owner of the old cinema discovered reels of home movies hidden behind a collapsed projection booth. None of them believed they possessed anything important. Mercer accepted every item with the same careful respect. He no longer searched for dramatic revelations. He searched for voices. One December afternoon, the courthouse receptionist knocked gently on his office door. "Someone is here to see you." Mercer looked up. They wouldn't give their name. An elderly man stood patiently in the hallway, bundled beneath a heavy wool coat dusted with snow. His face seemed vaguely familiar. "I heard," the stranger said quietly, "that you're collecting memories." Mercer nodded. "I try." The man smiled. "My father always said memories shouldn't belong to one family." From inside his coat, he removed a narrow wooden case no longer than a violin. The hinges squeaked softly as Mercer opened it. Inside rested dozens of glass lantern slides, early photographs, each one carefully labeled. The oldest dated back nearly a century. They carried scenes no one living had ever witnessed. The construction of the first bridge, children skating across a frozen creek, workers raising the courthouse clock tower, families gathered beneath trees that had long since disappeared. Mercer lifted one slide toward the window. The image glowed beautifully in the winter sunlight. At the bottom appeared a handwritten caption. "Every town deserves someone who remembers before forgetting becomes permanent." He looked back toward the elderly visitor. "What was your father's name?" The man smiled gently. He never wanted his name written down. Before Mercer could ask another question, the old man adjusted his hat. "I've carried those photographs for nearly 40 years. I think they're finally home." He stepped into falling snow and disappeared among the people crossing the square. Mercer hurried outside only moments later. The street was crowded. Children laughed while throwing snowballs. Delivery trucks rolled past. Families hurried between warm storefronts. The elderly man had vanished as though he had dissolved into the winter air. Mercer returned upstairs carrying the lantern slides. That evening he projected them onto the blank courthouse wall, inside the underground workshop. One after another, forgotten generations filled the stone chamber with light. Faces smiled. Children waved toward cameras that no longer existed. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron. Teachers stood proudly beside wooden classrooms. Musicians performed beneath banners faded by time. For hours Mercer watched the images pass across the wall. No soundtrack. No narration, only light. He suddenly understood why the keepers had preserved fragments instead of complete stories. A complete story eventually ends. Fragments invite the next generation to keep searching. He reached for his journal. Perhaps history survives best when every generation contributes one more page. The sentence felt right. He closed a notebook and looked around the workshop. The shelves no longer seemed empty. Maps, letters, photographs, journals, recordings, drawings. Every discovery had become part of something larger than any single mystery. Outside, snow continued falling across Shadow Ridge. Morning footprints disappeared before sunset. Fresh ones appeared the next day. Years would pass. People would come and go. Buildings would change. Roads would be widened. Old trees would fall. Children would grow old enough to tell stories of their own. Memory would continue shifting, just as it always had. But deep beneath the courthouse, inside a quiet chamber carved into stone long, before anyone living could remember, a growing collection of ordinary lives waited patiently for whoever might someday ask the simplest question of all: what was this place like before us? And somewhere, perhaps years from now, another curious stranger would open a heavy wooden door, brush the dust of an old leather journal, and discover that the truest inheritance of Shadow Ridge had never been treasure, secrets, or hidden power. It had always been the quiet courage of people who believed that even the smallest forgotten life was worth remembering. Spring arrived almost unnoticed. The snow retreated into the mountains. Black Creek swelled with clear water, carrying broken branches and last autumn's leaves toward the distant valley. The maple trees lining Main Street awakened one by one, covering Shadow Ridge in fresh shades of green. Mercer's journal had become 4 journals. The shelves beneath the courthouse slowly filled with carefully labeled boxes. Not evidence. Memories. A faded menu from the diner before it changed owners. The bell from the one-room schoolhouse. A child's hand-drawn map of the town from 1958. The handwritten recipe for the bakery's original sourdough bread. Every object carried a story. Every story carried a name. Word spread beyond Shadow Ridge. People who had moved away decades earlier began returning for a single afternoon, bringing with them small pieces of the town they had carried unknowingly for years. One woman arrived from the coast with nothing more than a pressed wildflower inside an old dictionary. My mother picked this beside Black Creek when she was 16, she explained. I don't know if it matters. Mercer smiled. It mattered to her. Then it matters here. An old railroad engineer delivered a cracked pocket watch that had stopped forever at 417. My grandfather always refused to repair it. Why? He said every town deserves one clock that remembers a perfect afternoon. Mercer carefully wrote the story beside the watch before placing it into a glass display drawer. The collection continued growing, not because history had been hidden, because people had finally found someone willing to listen. One quiet evening, Mercer climbed a hill overlooking Shadow Ridge. The old fire lookout tower still stood against the darkening sky. He carried no evidence bag, no camera, only his newest journal. The brass telescope remained exactly where he had first found it months earlier. This time he turned it away from the town. Instead, he pointed it toward the distant mountains where the setting sun painted the horizon gold. For several minutes he watched without writing, without thinking, simply watching. Footsteps sounded softly behind him. Mercer turned. A young woman, perhaps 25, stood near the staircase with a weathered canvas satchel over her shoulder. I hope I'm not interrupting. He smiled. Not at all. She hesitated. I've been searching for you. Mercer closed his notebook. What can I do for you? She placed the satchel carefully on the floor. My grandmother passed away last month. I'm sorry. Before she died, the young woman swallowed gently, that she asked me to deliver these. Inside the satchel rested dozens of cassette tapes, each neatly labeled. Interviews, local songs, conversations recorded around kitchen tables over nearly 50 years. My grandmother believed voices disappear faster than photographs. Mercer lifted one cassette. Across the label someone had written, Summer Evenings, 1972. Another read, Grandfather Explains a Flood. Another, Children Playing Outside the Old School. No famous speeches. No remarkable events. Only life, exactly as it had sounded. The young woman smiled. I almost threw them away. What changed your mind? She looked toward the valley below. Someone told me there was finally a place where forgotten things belonged. Mercer glanced toward Shadow Ridge. The courthouse clock reflected the last light of evening. Windows glowed warmly along Main Street. The library remained open a little later than usual. Children raced bicycles across the bridge. Life continued. Ordinary, beautiful, fragile. He accepted the satchel. They'll be safe. I know. She started toward the staircase before pausing. My grandmother said something strange. What was that? She smiled. She said the keepers were never chosen. They simply became the people who stayed long enough to care. Mercer watched as she disappeared into the forest. The words lingered long after she had gone. He opened his journal once more. The page remained blank for several minutes. Finally, he wrote only a single sentence. Perhaps every town already has its keepers. Most simply don't realize it yet. He closed the notebook. Far below, the evening lights of Shadow Ridge shimmered beside Black Creek. The wind moved gently through the pines. No mysteries demanded answers tonight. No forgotten archive waited beneath the earth. No hidden door called be opened. Only a quiet town, carrying thousands of ordinary lives through another peaceful sunset. Mercer smiled. Some stories ended with the truth finally uncovered. Others ended with the understanding that the search itself had changed everyone who undertook it. Shadow Ridge had given him neither fame nor certainty. It had given him something rarer, a reason to remember. And as darkness sailed across the valley, the town breathed softly beneath the stars, its past no longer buried beneath dust and silence, but alive in journals, voices, photographs, and the steady hands of those who understood that history was never truly written once. It was rewritten every day by those who refused to let kindness, courage, and memory disappear. Years slipped quietly through Shadow Ridge. The journals multiplied until one shelf became 5. The cassette tapes were carefully restored and converted into new recordings before age could erase them forever. Thousands of photographs were cleaned one by one. Faded maps were flattened beneath glass. Handwritten recipes, children's drawings, graduation programs, wedding invitations, newspaper clippings, train schedules, postcards, and forgotten letters slowly found permanent homes beneath the courthouse. No sign announced a collection. No tickets were sold. Visitors arrived only through word of mouth. They entered carrying ordinary objects and often left carrying something invisible, perspective. One autumn morning, Mercer unlocked the underground archive to find a boy waiting outside the hidden chamber. He looked no older than 14. Nervous, curious, his backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. "I heard this place exists," the boy said. Mercer smiled. "So did I once." The boy stepped inside slowly, staring at the endless rows of carefully preserved memories. "I thought it would be bigger." Mercer laughed softly. "It grows every year." The boy wandered between the shelves. He paused before a faded baseball glove, a cracked violin, a school lunch menu from 1968, a handmade toy boat carved from cedar. None of them looked extraordinary. "Why keep all this?" he finally asked. Mercer picked up the toy boat. "Tell me what you see." "A toy." Mercer nodded. "That's what I saw the first time." He turned the small wooden boat over. A child's name had been carefully carved into the bottom. Daniel. Summer 1954. Mercer opened the journal, resting beside it. Daniel built this with his grandfather after recovering from pneumonia. Every spring they floated it down Black Creek to see how far it traveled. The boy looked at the boat again. It no longer seemed ordinary. Mercer smiled. The object never changed. The story did. For the next several hours they walked through the archive together. Mercer never lectured. He simply told stories. How the old courthouse bell cracked during a blizzard, but continued ringing for another 30 years. Why one oak tree in the town square leaned slightly west after shielding children during a storm. How a bakery recipe survived because someone had copied it onto the back of a grocery receipt during a power outage. The boy listened quietly, not because the stories were dramatic, because they were real to the people who had lived them. Before leaving, he reached into his backpack. "I brought something." He carefully unfolded a sheet of lined notebook paper. "My great-grandmother used to tell me this story. I wrote it down before I forgot." Mercer accepted the page with both hands. It described a summer picnic beside Black Creek in 1949. Nothing remarkable happened. Children skipped stones. Adults laughed. A dog stole someone's sandwich. At sunset, everyone walked home together. Mercer finished reading and smiled. "This belongs here." The boy looked surprised. But nothing important happened. Mercer gently placed the page inside a protective folder. Something important always happens when people remember each other. The boy nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood. Years later, after Mercer himself had grown older, another shelf had to be built. Then another. The journals eventually filled an entire room. Visitors came from distant towns hoping to create similar archives of their own. Not copies. New collections. Each shaped by different memories, different voices, different lives. One quiet evening, Mercer climbed once again to the old fire lookout tower overlooking Shadow Ridge. The brass telescope remained there, polished by countless hands over the years. He no longer searched the town for mysteries. He watched children walking home from school, farmers returning across distant fields, smoke rising from chimneys as families gathered for supper. Simple moments, the kind future generations might one day struggle to imagine. He opened the newest journal. Its first page remained blank. Mercer thought for a long while before writing. History is often mistaken for the story of extraordinary people. It is not. History is the patient collection of ordinary mornings, ordinary evenings, ordinary conversations, and ordinary kindnesses that, together, become the memory of a place. He closed the journal. The sun dipped behind the mountains. Golden light washed gently across Shadow Ridge. The courthouse bell echoed through the valley. Children laughed somewhere below. A train horn sounded in the distance. Mercer listened to every sound without writing another word. He no longer feared that the town would forget itself. Too many hands now carried its memories. Too many voices had joined the chronicle. The keepers were no longer hidden beneath the courthouse. They walked the streets every day. The librarian who carefully repaired old books. The baker who still remembered recipes handed down through 4 generations. The teacher encouraging students to interview their grandparents. The photographer capturing ordinary afternoons. The child writing down a family story before it disappeared. Each became another quiet guardian of memory. As evening settled over Shadow Ridge, the lights of the town shimmered beneath the stars, not as a place haunted by secrets, but as a living tapestry woven from thousands of remembered lives. And somewhere, on a shelf deep beneath the courthouse, the very first journal Mercer had written rested beside all those that followed, its pages worn from years of careful reading, a reminder that every great story begins not with an answer, but with a single person willing to ask, to listen, and above all to remember. Many years later, visitors often ask the same question before leaving the archive. Where did it all begin? Some expected Mercer to point toward the abandoned lookout tower. Others believed it started inside the courthouse basement. A few insisted the answer must be hidden in one of Robert Vale's journals or Eleanor Ashcroft's carefully preserved maps. Mercer always smiled. Then he walked them to the oldest shelf in the collection. There, protected beneath simple glass instead of ornate display cases, rested a single yellowing sheet of paper. No signatures, no official seal, only a short handwritten sentence. If anything happens, don't trust the copies. Visitors usually stared at it in silence. It doesn't explain anything, they would finally say. Mercer nodded. It isn't supposed to. What does it mean? It reminds us to keep asking questions. He never explained further, because the sentence had long ago become something larger than the mystery that first inspired it. It had become the philosophy of the chronicle itself. Never accept that the first version of a story is the only one. Never assume the loudest voice is the truest. Never believe that ordinary lives leave ordinary legacies. One spring afternoon, nearly 20 years after Mercer first uncovered the hidden chamber, the courthouse welcomed its 10,000th visitor. There was no celebration, no speeches. The guest happened to be an elderly woman traveling through the mountains with her granddaughter. She wandered slowly through the archive before stopping in front of a wall filled with handwritten family memories. Tears quietly formed in her eyes. "My father's handwriting," she whispered. Mercer walked over. The woman pointed toward a small card displayed beside an old carpenter's ruler. He wrote this when he was 17. Mercer read the faded ink. Measure carefully. What forgives fewer mistakes than people do. The woman smiled through her tears. I had forgotten the sound of his handwriting. Mercer had never heard anyone describe handwriting that way. The sound of handwriting. He wrote the phrase into his journal before the day ended. Months later, a group of school children visited the Chronicle. Instead of beginning with lectures, Mercer divided them into pairs. Each pair received a different object: a train ticket, a wedding photograph, a grocery receipt, a faded baseball. Their task was simple. Imagine the ordinary day surrounding the object, not fantasy, not mystery, just life. The room quickly filled with conversations. One child wondered who baked the bread listed on the grocery receipt. Another imagined children waiting excitedly beside the railway station. A third noticed muddy fingerprints pressed into the edge of an old photograph. Mercer watched quietly from the back of the room. None of the children realized they were learning history. They believed they were simply telling stories. Perhaps there was no difference. Late that evening, after everyone had gone home, Mercer wandered through the archive alone. The underground chambers no longer felt hidden. Warm lights illuminated every shelf. Climate-controlled cabinets protected the oldest papers. Recorded voices could be heard softly from listening stations placed throughout the rooms. Visitors often laughed. Sometimes they cried. Most simply stood still for a while. Mercer stopped beside the Book of Keepers. The final page was no longer blank. Many names had been added over the years, not because they had solved impossible mysteries, not because they had uncovered buried secrets, because they had chosen to preserve someone else's memory before it faded. Teachers, students, artists, carpenters, mechanics, musicians, children, retirees, notaitas, only names, only people. Mercer rested his hand gently on the worn leather cover. The chain had continued exactly as Eleanor hoped, not through secrecy, through generosity. Outside, bells rang softly across Shadow Ridge as another evening settled over the valley. Families gathered around dinner tables. Neighbors greeted one another on quiet sidewalks. Lights appeared one by one in familiar windows. Tomorrow, someone would discover another forgotten photograph tucked inside an old book. Someone else would remember the name of a bridge no longer standing. Another child would ask a grandparent, "What was it like when you were young?" The chronicle would grow again, not because history had finished unfolding, because it never would. Mercer climbed the courthouse steps and looked across the peaceful town one final time before heading home. The wind carried the scent of pine and fresh rain. Somewhere, laughter echoed from the town square. Somewhere else, an old piano played through an open window. He smiled. The greatest mystery Shadow Ridge had ever offered him was no longer hidden beneath stone walls or locked inside forgotten archives. It had been quietly waiting in plain sight all along. How a community survives. How memories endure. How ordinary people, without ever realizing it, become the authors of a place that will outlive them. And as the evening skies slowly filled with stars above the mountains, the chronicle waited patiently for another page, another voice, another memory, never reaching an ending, because the story of a town that chooses to remember can never truly be finished.